My brother got a standing ovation at Thanksgiving dinner the year he closed his first corporate deal. My dad literally stood up from his chair, raised his glass, and said, "That's my son." My mom cried. Not the quiet, dabbing the corner of your eye kind. The full, proud, hand-over-heart kind. The full, proud, hand-over-heart kind. I sat across the table and smiled. Nobody raised a glass for me. Nobody even asked how my week went. That was 4 years ago. I think about that dinner more than I probably should. My brother Nathan has always been the one. From the time he was 16 and won some regional debate competition, my parents decided he was the blueprint. Pre-law at Michigan, law school at Georgetown, then a junior associate position at a firm in downtown Chicago that my dad still brags about to his golf buddies like he passed the bar himself. Every holiday, every phone call, every conversation that started with "How's your brother doing?" before anyone thought to ask about me. I'm not bitter about Nathan specifically. He's not a bad person. He worked hard. He got what he worked for. What I'm bitter about is how my parents used his success as a measuring stick and held it against my neck for a decade. My name is Brooke. I'm 31 now. And for most of my 20s, I was the family disappointment. Not because I was failing, but because I wasn't failing in the right direction. I graduated with a degree in graphic design from a state school. Not Michigan, not Georgetown. A state school in Ohio that my dad once called a fine enough place. My mom asked at graduation if I had a backup plan. I was 22, holding a diploma, and she was asking about backup plans. I moved to Columbus after graduation and started doing freelance work. Logo design, branding packages, social media graphics for small businesses. Nothing glamorous. I was charging $300 for full brand packages when I should have been charging $3,000, but I didn't know that yet. I was still figuring out what I was worth. Every time I came home for the holidays, the conversation followed the same script. My dad would ask Nathan about his cases, not the details, just the general sense of them. Enough to retell at dinner parties. My mom would ask Nathan if he was seeing anyone, because a man like him deserves someone wonderful. Then one of them would turn to me and ask if I was still doing the design stuff. Still. Like it was a phase. Like any day now I'd come to my senses and do something real. I stopped volunteering information about my work around the time I turned 26. Not because I was ashamed of it, because the response was always the same. Polite, flat, slightly pitying. My mom would say, "That sounds creative," the way people say "bless your heart." My dad would nod and change the subject back to Nathan. So I just stopped sharing. What they didn't know was that by the time I was 27, I had quietly built something. I'd spent 2 years doing cheap work, learning what clients actually needed, figuring out the difference between design that looked pretty and design that performed. I started niching down into brand identity for women-owned small businesses. I built a portfolio that was specific, sharp, and different from what most freelancers in my market were offering. I started getting referrals. Then I raised my rates. Then I raised them again. I wasn't rich. I want to be honest about that. At 27, I was comfortable, paying my rent, putting money in savings, taking one real vacation a year. But I was building something with a foundation, and I knew it. I also knew better than to say any of this to my family. The Thanksgiving I'm going to tell you about happened when I was 28. Nathan had just made senior associate at his firm. He was 31 at the time. It was, by every measure, a legitimate achievement. I don't want to take that away from him, but the way my parents talked about it that night, like he had personally cured a disease, like his career advancement was proof that they had done something extraordinary as parents. It was a lot to sit through. We were in my parents' house in the suburbs outside Cincinnati. My mom had made her usual spread: turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, 2 pies. Everything smelled like home in the good way. I had driven 3.5 hours by myself. I had been looking forward to it, actually. Stupid, maybe. But I always hope it'll be different. We were maybe 40 minutes into dinner when my dad started talking about property. Nathan had mentioned casually that he was thinking about buying a place. A condo in Lincoln Park, probably. The good part of Lincoln Park, he said. My dad's eyes lit up. Real estate in that part of Chicago is no joke, my dad said. You're talking serious money. But that's where you invest. You buy there, you don't lose. Nathan talked about square footage and comps in his timeline. He knew the vocabulary. My parents listened like he was reading scripture. I don't know exactly why I said what I said next. I think I was tired. I think 4 years of that same dinner had worn something down in me, and for one unguarded moment I forgot that I decided not to share. I've actually been looking to, I said. There's a development going up in the Short North. I've been talking to a realtor. The Short North is Columbus's arts district. For anyone who doesn't know it, it's not a consolation prize. It's genuinely desirable, walkable, growing, the kind of neighborhood that's been appreciating steadily for years. The table got quiet for a second. My mom tilted her head. In Columbus, she said. Yes. My dad made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was more like a breath with amusements in it. He picked up his fork. Brooke, honey, do you know what condos go for in a neighborhood like that? You're talking 300,000-400,000 easy. I know, I said. Nathan set down his glass. He was doing the thing where he looks patient but is actually just preparing what he's going to say next. Are you pre-approved? Have you talked to a lender? I said I had. My mom said, I just worry, sweetheart. You're doing the freelance thing, and lenders like to see stability. W-2's consistent income. It's not that you can't. I just wonder if the timing is right. The freelance thing. I sat with that for a second. I kept my voice even. I've been doing this for 6 years, I said. My income has been consistent. I've talked to a lender. I have a down payment ready. My dad nodded slowly, the way he does when he's decided the subject is closed. I'm sure you've thought it through. I just think, and I say this because I love you, for a commitment that size, you want to have a real solid foundation. Nathan's got the firm behind him. That's different. Nathan said nothing. He just looked at his plate. My mom reached across and touched my hand. We just don't want you to overextend yourself, baby. I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about all the times I'd driven 3.5 hours for this table. I thought about every "that sounds creative" and every still doing the design stuff and every glass raised for my brother while I sat invisible across from them. I didn't say any of what I was thinking. I smiled. I said, I appreciate that. And I decided something right then. I decided they would find out when it was done, not before. I closed on my condo 4 months later. 2 bedrooms, top floor of a new build in the Short North. The kind of place with big windows and a rooftop terrace and a building gym I actually use. I put 20% down. My mortgage payment was less than most people's rent in the neighborhood. I didn't tell my family. I moved in on a Saturday in March with my 2 closest friends helping me carry boxes. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and it was, genuinely, one of the best nights of my life. I put a plant on the windowsill and looked out at the street and thought, I built this. Nobody handed this to me. Nobody raised a glass. About a month after I moved in, my business crossed a threshold I'd been working toward for 2 years. I had quietly restructured, brought on a part-time project manager, launched a retainer model for ongoing clients, and started doing brand strategy in addition to design execution. My revenue that quarter was more than I'd made in my first 3 years of freelancing combined. I'm not going to say the exact number. What I'll say is that it was the kind of quarter that made me sit at my desk for a long time after I looked at the report, just very still, realizing that the thing I'd been building in the background, while my family asked about my backup plan, was actually real. That summer, my parents came to Columbus to visit. My mom had a college friend in town and they wanted to see me while they were there. I met them for lunch and afterward my mom said, "Let's see your apartment. We haven't seen where you're living." I said okay. We drove to the Short North. I parked in my building's garage. We took the elevator up. I unlocked the door. My mom walked in first. She stopped in the entryway. My dad came in behind her and went very quiet. It's a good place. I've made it mine. Clean limes, warm colors, good light, art on the walls that I actually chose instead of just having. It doesn't look like a first place. It doesn't look like someone who is doing the freelance thing. My mom said, Brooke, this is beautiful. My dad walked to the window. He looked out at the street. He turned around slowly and said, When did you? How long have you been here? About 4 months, I said. He looked like he was doing math he didn't like the answer to. You bought this? Yes. My mom sat down on my couch. She had this expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite proud. Not quite embarrassed. Somewhere in between. Working something out. You just didn't say anything, she said. I thought about Thanksgiving. I thought about the sound my dad made when I mentioned I was looking. The breath with amusement in it. No, I said. I didn't. Nobody said much for a minute. My dad looked at the kitchen. He looked at the ceilings. He asked how much I was paying in mortgage, and I told him. He nodded for a long time. This is a real place, he said, like he was saying it to himself more than to me. I didn't say anything. We went out to dinner that night, and it was different than it had ever been. My dad asked about my business. Not the design stuff, he called it my business. And actually listened to the answer. My mom asked about my clients. They asked follow-up questions. It wasn't a grand apology. Nobody said we should have believed in you. But something had shifted, and I could feel it. I thought that was the end of the story. I thought we had arrived somewhere, quietly, and things would just be different going forward. Then Nathan called me in October. I was at my desk on a Tuesday morning, deep in a client presentation, when my phone buzzed. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I picked up. He said he needed to talk. He said it wasn't a big deal. He just wanted to run something by me. I already knew somehow, from the way he said it. Nathan had made a real estate investment 18 months earlier. Not his Lincoln Park condo. That was still in the works apparently. A separate investment property, out in the suburbs with a couple of other guys from his firm. They had all put money in, figured the market was one direction, and the market went the other direction. Nathan had leveraged more than he should have. He was fine, he said. He was definitely fine. But he was in a tight spot for a few months, and he was wondering if I might be able to help bridge the gap. He named a number. It was a significant number. It was a this is not small number. I held the phone and looked out my big window at the short North Street below. I thought about 4 years of Thanksgiving dinners. I thought about, that's where you invest. I thought about him setting down his glass and asking if I'd talk to a lender. I asked him what happened to the other guys from his firm. He said they'd already covered their end. He said he just needed a little time. I said, Nathan, I'm not going to do that. He was quiet. Then he said, Brooke, it's just a bridge. I'll pay you back in 90 days, I promise. I said, I believe you'd mean to. But no. He asked why. And I thought about it for a second. Not performing thought. Actually thinking. Because he deserved an honest answer even if he wouldn't love it, because you didn't believe I could do what I've done, I said. And I don't mean that as an attack. I just mean you asked me if I'd talk to a lender. You looked at your plate. You let them say what they said and you didn't push back once. I'm not a bank and I'm not a backup plan. He didn't have much to say to that. We got off the phone politely. I sat with the silence for a while. He worked it out eventually. I found out through my mom, who mentioned it without much context a few months later. He was fine. Of course he was fine. He's Nathan. Christmas that year was the strangest of my life in the best way. We were all there, me, my parents, Nathan, his girlfriend. My mom had made the same spread as always. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. My dad gave a toast at the beginning of dinner. He talked about the year, what everyone had accomplished. When he got to me, he said, and Brooke, who I think we all underestimated and shouldn't have. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a speech. It was one sentence, said with his glass in the air, said in front of everyone. I nodded. I said, "Thank you, Dad." Nathan caught my eye across the table. He raised his glass slightly. I raised mine back. I don't need them to understand everything I've built. I don't need the apology to be bigger than it was. I needed to build something real, in the quiet, without anyone's permission. And then let the walls of the place I bought with my own money do the talking. They did. I drove home from Cincinnati on December 26 with my leftovers in the back seat and the radio low. I got off at my exit, pulled into my parking garage, took the elevator up, unlocked my door. My plant was still on the windowsill. I put my leftovers in the refrigerator, sat down on my couch, and thought about nothing in particular for a long time. It's a good feeling, that specific feeling of being exactly where you put yourself. Nobody placed me here. Nobody's name is on this but mine. I think about that sometimes when the work gets hard, when a client is difficult, or a project isn't going the way I want. I think, I built this room. I built this quiet. I can build the next thing too, and I don't need anyone to raise a glass about it. I've thought a lot about why I didn't fight back at that Thanksgiving table. Why I smiled, said, "I appreciate that," and let it go. For a long time I told myself it was discipline, that I was playing the long game, and maybe that was part of it, but the honest answer is that I didn't fight back because deep down I wasn't completely sure of myself yet. I had the work. I had the numbers. But I didn't have the kind of confidence that comes from having already arrived somewhere, and that only comes from one place. Time, and doing the thing anyway, even when nobody believes in it. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell stories like mine. It's not just that I worked hard. Lots of people work hard and stay stuck. What changed things for me was that I stopped waiting for permission to take myself seriously. My parents weren't going to give it to me. My brother wasn't going to give it to me. The validation I was quietly hoping for at every holiday table. It was never coming from them. And somewhere around 27, I finally understood that waiting for it was costing me more than it was worth. The choices I made after that weren't dramatic. I didn't storm out of any dinners. I didn't confront anyone. I just redirected every ounce of energy I'd been spending on hoping they'd notice. And I put it back into the work. I raised my rates. I said no to the clients who didn't fit. I built systems. I stopped apologizing for what I was building. And what happened to Nathan? I don't say this with any satisfaction because I genuinely don't feel satisfied by it. But what happened to him is the natural result of a different kind of choice. He was brilliant. Genuinely. He worked hard too. But he leveraged himself on the assumption that a title and a firm name made him invincible. He stopped doing the unglamorous work of checking his own numbers because the external validation was so loud it drowned everything else out. My parents' praise, the firm's recognition, the social proof of a good address, it all became the thing he was building toward instead of a byproduct of something real. That's the difference, I think. Not talent, not even effort. It's whether you're building something or performing something. I'm not a perfect person. I've made financial mistakes, lost clients I shouldn't have lost, underpriced my work longer than I should have. I've also been impatient and closed off and slow to forgive. When Nathan called me in October, I said no, and I don't regret it. But I also know that the way I said it carried years of stored-up hurt, not just principle. Both things were true at the same time. What I know now, sitting in the apartment I bought with money I made doing work I chose, is that integrity is mostly just a series of small decisions made when nobody is watching. The rate you charge when you could get away with less. The client you turn down because the fit is wrong. The family dinner you sit through quietly instead of proving yourself to people who aren't ready to see you yet. None of it is glamorous. Most of it nobody will ever know about. But it accumulates. It builds a floor under you that holds. My dad said I was underestimated. One sentence, glass in the air. It wasn't everything. But it was something, and I let it be enough, because I had already given myself everything else I needed.